In this video, we talk about Java identifiers, which is the name of a variable, how to declare a variable, and how to initialize it, how to give it a value. An identifier is simply a name, but it's a name with a lot of rules, and we will originally just make variables and give them identifiers, but eventually we will have identifiers for constants, for methods, which are subroutines, and classes. There are very specific rules about identifiers, and I'll underline them. So every single letter in the Java language, if you would like your program to run, begins with a letter. It can only contain letters, underscores, or digits, no other symbols from your keyboard. You can't have any blank spaces in your variable's name, the identifier, and it can't be a reserved word. And I'll give you a whole list of reserved words. Those are words that Java uses for other things for the programs to run. When you make a name for your variable, when you create a Java identifier, they are case sensitive, and this is pretty standard in most languages. So this variable and this variable have different identifiers because the G is lowercase here and uppercase here. And it wouldn't matter which letter we would have picked. It could have been any of the letters, as long as one of them are different. Uppercase and lowercase letters are different symbols on the keyboard, therefore different variables. So some rules that we will follow. A single word identifier, like grade and grade up there, will be written all in lowercase. If you mean for it to be a variable, actually, or a method name, and it's just one word, then you're just going to write out the whole word. We're not going to use variables like X, Y, and Z like you would in a math class. We're going to give them a whole word, and when you give it the whole word, I will encourage you to be descriptive in your naming of the variable. So grade, hopefully, contains a grade. Number, a number. We don't know if it's an integer or a real number. And sum, maybe you're doing some computation in your program, and sum would be a great name for the sum of several values. Class names doesn't really mean a lot to you yet, but there are some classes, kind of a different kind of data type, or a whole program in itself. And when you make a class, you make up your own variable name for that class, your identifier for that class. And if it's a class, I will want you to follow the convention to have it be uppercase. And our textbook and our online curriculum, the documents that I'm going to give you, will all be consistent with this. If you need a little bit more complicated name and you need a couple words, then you put two words together. Remember that you can't have a space, so you put two words together with an uppercase letter showing where the second word or third or fourth words begin. Okay, so passing score, I'm assuming that this is referring to a variable, just a simple variable, but passing score is a descriptive name for it, and so the P should be lowercase, and the S, because it's the second word, should be capitalized. Similarly, largest num. We will have some instances where we want to name a variable, except it's really not a variable. It's a constant. It's not going to change. Just like pi, just like max number value. Okay, so if it is a constant, you want to tell the programmer that very clearly. Hey, this is not a variable, it's not going to change, but I want to use an identifier for it. And there's good reasons to do that, which we will talk about in another month or two. So those are all uppercase, and that's following convention. If you need multiple words, well, you can't only capitalize the first letter of the next word, so you connect it with underscores. There's several different examples here on this page that are declaring variables of different data types. So you are always going to put the data type first, and it can be of any data type of the 8 primitive data types that we talked about in the other movie. This is your identifier. And as I said before, make sure that it is descriptive, describes what you are going to store in there. So what this says is, right here, this says, I'm going to make an integer, and what am I going to name it? I'm going to name it number. So please grab that memory space and assign it number. And so whenever I do something with the variable number, go to that memory place and grab it. So you can also declare 3 on one line, as the second line does. So all 3 identifiers, num1, num2, num3, are integers. Here's just a different data type. So the data type always has to be first, and I called this particular double first. Okay, this says go grab enough memory for a double, whatever you need for your machine, and assign that the name, the identifier first. And char my initial, just another example. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing on this one, and these are going to represent, these boxes here are supposed to represent the actual contents of the identifier that we're describing. Okay, so last slide was just variable declarations. This is declarations and initializations. Okay, so there are multiple ways to do this, and so I'll talk through these examples. So int number does this. Okay, so this particular piece of code does this. Grab enough for an int, and as I mentioned, that's 4 bytes, and refer to it as number. And we don't know what the value inside is. There's actually a default, but I want you to think about it as it's just garbage. Okay, and it needs to be filled before you use it. And then this particular line does this. Number, go to number, okay, we know where number is, and assign it 5. But actually, I talked about right to left and left to right. Actually, what this does is there's a 5, and what do I want to do with that 5? I want to assign it to number. Okay, so go grab the memory space that was number, and instead of not knowing what's in there, fill it with 5. Okay, and number doesn't ever remember that it had garbage in there before. Okay, so this line, I'll highlight it, this line declared the variable, this line initialized it with a value. And you can read the Word document, and it also gives examples. This declares and initializes it in one fell swoop. Okay, so this says go grab enough memory for a double, which we know is 8 bytes, name it first, and fill it with 88.73. And there's times when you're going to want to do it this way, there's times when you're going to want to do it this way. It's just going to depend on what your program requires. So here we have 2 characters declared on one line of code. The semicolon ends the line of code. One is called my first initial, one is called my last initial. But this is kind of weird because they give my first initial a value, and I'll talk about the single quotes in a minute. They don't give anything to my last initial. Okay, so my first initial goes right there, and it has the contents of a D. My last initial is named right there, and it has garbage in it. So it's okay to have 2 characters declared on one line. Some of them, so one of them is given a value and one of them is not. So notice right here the single quotes. Okay, your program would not run if you have a character data type and you tried to fill it with just a D. If you forgot the single quotes off of that, your program would not run.